Hi, this is PHQ, questions from the community here at Personality Hacker. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And today, before we get to our question, we have been figuring out this process of how PHQ is going to look. And I've complained about it in previous podcasts. I don't think I've complained about it. It's a high quality problem or high quality challenge, like Joel likes to say. He doesn't like to say the word problem. It's a challenge. And the challenge is that we have a lot of correspondence at Personality Hacker. So what we've done is we've requested that the audience, when they want to send a question into PHQ, that they shoot us an email at info@personalityhacker.com and put PHQ in the subject line. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our handy dandy assistant, Addison, read the questions and let us know which questions are coming through and then read them on the air. So what we wanted to do is introduce all the PHQ listeners to Addison. Welcome, Addison.
Hi.
And also, Addison's been helping us on the back end for a few weeks here, and we were bringing her to the forefront because we think she's going to be great at helping us with this. Obviously, my dream in this PHQ format is to have you ask your question verbally somehow to us in the future. We're still setting all that up. So in lieu of that, Addison is going to be your surrogate voice. When you write in a question,
very exciting.
It's going to be her that's going to reinterpret your question for us, and then we can answer them.
And Addison's great. She started working with us a couple weeks ago officially. She'd been helping us with projects beforehand. She's an ENTP, and she feels like a younger version of me. She feels like a mini me. It's kind of weird sometimes. So I've grown very fond of Addison, and it's going to be really nice to have her help. So you'll probably, if you shoot us an email, you'll probably get a response from Addison. She's the person who's going to be fielding our PHQ emails. So if you hear from her virtually through email or even some correspondence on the blog, that's natural and normal because she's going to be one of our chief people to help us with, getting through the correspondence and making sure that nobody's questions are ignored or, slip through the cracks. So
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, Addison, you want to go and just get right into our question?
All right. This question is from Lori, and she says, "Hello, Antonia and Joel. I have been listening to your podcast and have been bouncing around on them. In the Trauma and Personality Test cast, you mentioned it was not a good idea to test yourself while in depression or a like state, but I was wondering if long-term mild depression can be a symptom of not understanding your inner workings and your type and the turmoil inside it can cause. Then in the INFJ podcast, you mentioned Antonia's mother was dealing with depression because of the pain caused by being an INFJ. Since I've been reading some detailed writings on INFJs, I feel what I have been considering depression may not really be depression, but a frustration of not really being understood and not knowing why. I see that I go through the world differently, but cannot exactly get anyone to understand. I've spent many sessions trying to convince my therapist that I do really like myself, but don't feel that it is acceptable in the world, only to be met with, I must not really like myself, which is a frustrating circle because I know it is not true. Anyways, I could go on, but find it difficult to connect the dots in a sufficient way. I hope my question is clear. Any help would be appreciated."
Thank you for that question. It's Lori, right?
Yes.
Thanks for that question, Lori. One of the things I want to say before we really get into answering that question is I want to be very clear that we are not licensed therapists. We are not, we don't have therapy training and, official training around that. I think we've got a lot of good stuff to say, but if you are dealing with any kind of healing in your life and you're listening to this question from Lori and you do need therapy, please seek out a licensed professional, a counselor, somebody that's licensed and knows what they're talking about in a therapy framework.
Yeah. Well, I think what she was asking is not so much therapy oriented. I think what she was asking is, when we said don't take a test if you're depressed, does that go contrary to this concept of, well, maybe I'm depressed because I don't know my type, so then what do I do? Yeah. Right? So is there ever a reason to take an assessment when you're depressed? I think what's nice about the Myers-Briggs system and the amount of resources and tools available online is that we actually recommend people go for what we call their best fit type, which is not necessarily what an assessment has churned out for you. All assessments have an error rate. All of them are going to have a certain percentage of, just being completely off. So if you over rely on the assessment and over rely on what the test tells you are, you might actually, you don't fit yourself to that. You might actually end up shoehorning yourself into the wrong type, which is not what we recommend at all. The assessment is like a launching pad. It's a starting point. It helps you narrow down type to maybe a couple different possibilities. Fundamentally, though, it's up to you to figure out what your type is based on reading descriptions and finding something that feels like it fits like a glove. So if you are an INFJ and you've taken the assessment and you've come out maybe INFP or ENFJ or maybe a couple different styles, but you hear a description of INFJ and that's like, oh, you're crying because you've never felt so understood. Yeah, that's probably what you are. You're probably an INFJ. The second component is, could you be depressed because you don't feel understood based on your personality type? And the answer is absolutely. The reason why we don't recommend people take assessments when they're in a major depression is that different components of their personality are going to start surfacing. Most notably, what we call the 3-year-old process. We're generally in a sustained depression because we are not allowed to get the energy that our driver process gives us. That flow state that regenerates our batteries. We, for some reason, don't feel permission to be there, either because that part of us is overtaxed or because we get outside feedback that it's wrong somehow. So we're going to be manifesting portions or parts of our personality that are generally, when we're at higher levels of health or happiness, are more foreign to us, more parts of us that we don't really think of as ourselves. That's why when we're depressed, we oftentimes have this impression that we aren't ourselves. Like, I'm not being myself. I'm just really down. I don't feel like myself right now. It's because you're using parts of you that are more alien to you when you are in a better space. So if you're just starting out, if you're taking the tests for the first time, if this is a brand new territory to you, then when you test while you're depressed, you're probably going to be answering questions that match those parts of you that are less utilized, and it's probably going to have a false read or the wrong type read.
I would also say that not just depression, but other intense stressors on your life. So if you're under amounts of stress, let's say you're going through a separation or divorce, or your child is sick, or they're going through a stressful time, you're trying to be there for them. Any of those like difficult times in your life, beyond just depression itself, can skew results because you're going to be thrown into those parts of your personality that you're not used to being in during those times.
Yeah, absolutely. That said, there are certain personality types that get more feedback from the outside world than other types, that they're not acceptable the way that they operate when they're at their best. As in, we've talked about the perspectives process or introverted intuition. We talked about it on the podcast where we compared introverted intuition versus extroverted intuition, or what we call perspectives and exploration. The perspectives process is only used by 10% of the population, and it's a much smaller percentage of the population that uses it as a driver process. Our speculation is that it's a relatively new, sort of technology, like mental technology. And so because it's new, because it's not used very often, the perspectives process, it's not even marginalized like some other processes are. It's just ignored or not understood or just considered to be not a thing, right? Like people see the perspectives process as being weird and that person who's using it is weird, but they wouldn't have any language around what they mean by that, right? Like they would just say it's weird to think like that. So INJs, both INFJs and INTJs, I think, experience this feeling like there's something wrong with them or the rest of the world just can't understand or appreciate who they are. And to some extent, they're right. Like they're not wrong when they think that most of the world is ignoring this massive piece of their identity.
Yeah, and that perspectives process is very, I think there is a label for it oftentimes from people that don't understand it. It's woo-woo. It's, speculative. It's kooky. It's kind of weird and quirky and doesn't really make sense to the outside world. The people that don't have this as their process don't value it. And so they are a little bit marginalizing with it to some degree.
Yeah, and I think INTJs, I think they're a little better at feeling like they don't care what other people think, though I believe it is a frustration for them whenever they're in any context where they want credibility or they want people to listen. It's like they have to do some mental gymnastics in order to get other people to understand where they're coming from, which must be a frustration. I think INFJs, though, because they're more sensitive to social norms and how people, like the status quo of how we're supposed to be behaving, I think it's more pressure on them emotionally. It makes them feel like they're somehow wrong because they're getting social feedback that says that whatever they're doing isn't right. And that will send them into, I've known a lot of INFJs in long stage mild depression or dysthymia. That's not uncommon. I think that's a part of why we do what we do at Personality Hacker, because we see these personality types. INFJs are not the only ones, by the way, but we see these personality types that have so much personal power if they could tap into it. But all that energy is getting, siphoned over to, am I good enough? Am I acceptable? And just fighting this image of who they are compared to everybody else. And so there is some truth to that thought, that if you can't accept, or if you haven't been given permission, or you haven't given yourself permission, really more accurately, to fully be in your strengths and fully be your personality type, that will put you in a low-grade depression for sure. So the answer to that then, being all over the board here, all over the place, trying to encapsulate it, is when you are not at your best self, taking a test might give you a false read. And also, if you go down this rabbit's hole of reading different profiles and reading different descriptions of types, and you find one that matches you and feels right for you, regardless of whether or not you've come out as that type on a test, that's your best fit type. And knowing your best fit type and understanding how you operate and how your mind is wired and giving yourself permission to fully step into that is absolutely going to help with depression, because you're no longer going to be marginalizing yourself. You're no longer going to be telling yourself you're not allowed to be in your flow state. You'll be able to enter that flow state and get all the benefits, all the rewards of being in your flow state, which is that energy that you get by doing activities that allow you to utilize that driver process. So I think that it's important when you're going down this path to hold loosely assessments and their results, to hold loosely this concept of, I have to be whatever somebody else has deemed me to be in either assessment situation or in real life, right? Or in just general feedback. And to move where your intuition tells you to move. Like if you're an INFJ in particular, or an INTJ or an ENFJ or an, whatever type you are, move to where your intuition is telling you to go, find those things that resonate, and then do the thing that we believe is one of the most first powerful, entry points into typology understanding, and that is give yourself full permission to be yourself, regardless of what the world around you is telling you.
Absolutely. Well, I think you summed it up well, so I don't need to add to that. Thank you, Lori, for the question. I think that was a really good answer, and I think it was a great question from you, Lori. And Addison, thanks, by the way, for reading and coming on board and be a part of the PHQ for right now.
Of course.
During this time period. If you have more questions, again, you can shoot those over with PHQ in the subject line to info@personalityhacker.com. The more direct your question is, the easier it is for us to answer. So if you can really be clear on the question you're asking, that's very helpful to us. And we can get to those in time as we get more of these pouring in. And then, again, my dream is to have a way where you can call in somehow and leave a voicemail so it feels like we're having a conversation here on the air when we record these, which would be something I'd like to set up here really soon.
Yeah, we'll see if that's coming down the pike pretty soon. That would be really cool.
We'll let you know when it does. So my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk to you on the next PHQ, questions from the community here at Personality Hacker.